Hey, how's it going?
Going great. How are you?
Good.
Thanks for joining us. You're down in LA. It's sunny, or rather rainy day.
No, I wish I were down in LA, but I am stuck in London. I've been here for almost 2 weeks. My partner came down with COVID 2 days after we got here, and now we can't get back into the US.
Oh no, I'm
Fortunately,
sorry
she's
for that.
recovered, so hopefully soon.
Yeah, yeah. Well, fingers crossed. Well, thank you so much for joining us. I know that the group is eager to start jumping into questions, but I wanted to tell you a little story about. I mentioned you kind of the first time we met. Um, and I want to tell you a little bit about it. So folks, I first met Will in New York. My partner Jonathan Ehrlich and I went to the Thrive office to meet with him. This is like December 2014, and like I just started working full time again. Like I just joined Foundation a few months earlier. I had it was mainly business school, but I hadn't really had a real job for several years up to that point. And I remember it just gotten cold. I just seen my family, and I was living in San Francisco. So I was like, I need a jacket, and I like grabbed this jacket from my sister's house, which was this like North Face fleece that I remember buying with my parents in like 1997. And it was like a discounted thing from an outlet, and it was like 3 sizes too big. Anyway, so I'm wearing it. We walk into your office. I'm wearing that and other kind of random stuff, and we sit down with you. We have a really nice chat, and you're wearing like this fitted button down and these like really trim dark pants. They're like definitely not jeans, made out of like a wool potentially, right? And leather shoes, a nice polish on them. And it's like not directly, off of a Milan runway, I think, but I'd say like, sitting in the front row of the audience, right, of a runway show. And I just remember thinking so distinctly, I was like, I got to get my shit together. But anyway, no, it was a great chat. It's just
A lot's
you
changed
made an impression.
in 7 years, particularly with work with home. I pretty much live in sweatpants these days. So, yeah, new world.
Yeah, yeah. We all do. This is the first time I'm wearing a shirt in a long time. But let me jump in. So Chief Product Officer at Stripe. What does that mean? What would you say you do here?
Yeah, so it's meant a lot of things. And by the way, it is late here in London. It's almost 11. So if I am a little bit discursive, I apologize in advance. But it's meant a lot of things. I joined Stripe actually initially as CFO back in 2015. My first 3 years, I was sort of exclusively CFO, and then I had about a 2-year period where I parallel tracked being CFO and CPO, and then the past year I've been just CPO. So it's been a sort of it's meant a lot of things, candidly. What it means today is basically looking after some of the core product horizontals, so looking after the PM function and a couple of other sort of related functions internally, and then just sort of running and managing some of our core businesses. And so until about 4 months ago, I was heavily focused on the core payments business and sort of the related fintech platform business that we have. We've built up some pretty good leadership teams there, and those are now going directly into Patrick. And over the past 4 months, I've actually turned my attention to some of our newer businesses, and I'm sort of working on building those out and getting the leadership teams in place there. And I think the success metrics for that will be sort of how many of those leaders go directly into Patrick before long. So it's not really an incubation role, but it's more of a sort of develop new dimensions of the Stripe organization and business.
Gotcha. So standing up leadership structure. So is the sort of issuing Treasury is kind of like maybe those next most likely to get to Patrick, or like what?
They actually already have.
Okay.
And so those went with sort of the fintech platform stuff. And now I'm really heavily focused on actually some of the internal SaaS that we're building with a particular focus on finance professionals and finance teams. There's a business internally called Revenue and Financial Management, and so I'm working a lot on that these days. We have a newfound crypto team, which is very small, but it's going to grow very, very fast. We can get to crypto if it's interesting to hit on. And then what we're finding too is that some of our core product experiences are sort of we're reaching a plateau in terms of how good they can be without us creating a very thin direct relationship with consumers. And so, I think a lot of people would think this is sort of the gestational period of Stripe Pay. It's actually not. We're doing the sort of typical Stripe thing where we're actually trying to create this thin layer with consumers and then offer it as a platform to third-party developers. So, we can authenticate a consumer to Stripe and then render their bank account, which is already linked to Stripe, or render payment methods that are already linked to Stripe, and then allow merchants building out Stripe to create experiences that are strongly enhanced by those sort of direct relationships that Stripe has with consumers.
So you already know what this is fascinating. I want to make sure I'm understanding. So you as Stripe know my identity, and maybe even have credentials to my bank account, and that you want to enable developers to, or merchants to access that with more readily.
Yes. Yeah. So broadly, like a good example of this would be linking a bank account, so you can make bank mediated payments. Some of these are ACH payments in the US, but they could be push transfers in Europe related to open banking or otherwise. And there's an incredible hit to conversion if you, as a single merchant, try to get a consumer to go through a bank authentication flow. And so one of our core theses, or just not theses, but one of our core philosophies at Stripe is that payments are way too expensive, which is sort of ironic because a lot of people see their Stripe bills and they're like, oh my God, Stripe has taken 3% of my revenue. And it's like, it cuts both ways, but in some ways I wish we were taking 3%, but we're not. It's like nowhere close to that. We so much of it goes straight through to the payment system. And so if you want to decrease the cost of payments without hitting conversion, you need to sort of networkify some of those connections, right? So that the next merchant that comes to Stripe can easily see, oh, Zach has hooked up these cards, has hooked up these bank accounts, and if I can just get him to do an OTP or something like that, all of those can be rendered and we can get better guarantees on fund transfers. There's a lot of new things we're working on in that area where we can, I think, strongly enhance what we call the GPTN, our Global Payments and Treasury Network, with a very thin connection to consumers.
And how do you think about, because it's sort of this age-old quandary of incentivizing the consumer to not get paid, 1.5%, let's say, for that transaction. Is that, you sort of think about that as well, that's sort of the merchant and the developer's problem to figure out, and we just want to build a seamless capability.
Yeah, it's sort of I think that's probably maybe the primary dimension of it, right? Which is it's sort of 1.5% is let's say you're just going to match the rewards that they're getting from a credit card. That's a whole lot less than 3%, right? And so you can already save someone a whole lot of money there. But beyond that, there's even a notion of just even if the merchants wanted to offer 3% rewards, the way the card networks work today is they sort of arrogate the rewards funding, or not the card networks don't, but the issuers arrogate the rewards funding to themselves, so they can say it's our rewards on the card versus an on-demand platform saying you get particular rewards for my service when you pay with a different payment method. So it's a little bit in the weeds here, but what we're finding in early testing is that we think actually we can convince consumers to do that. Yeah.
So you're saying sort of tap into the merchant gross margin. Yeah. No, I think they're with you. Well, let's move on. I definitely take note of the crypto mention. We will make sure we'll get back to that. But just to people were. I talked to a lot of folks about what they were most interested in hearing from you, and you've had such a unusual kind of path from a career perspective, and folks just so curious to hear kind of what this has felt like, how you've sort of pursued your career, and so really even just kind of how did you get here is something that a lot of people wanted to hear about.
Yeah. So I worked right out of school. I went to Blackstone and I tried to do a parallel track of a math PhD at the Krant Institute at NYU, which I think made me probably the worst analyst in Blackstone's history. I actually wouldn't be surprised if actually I was the worst rated analyst in Blackstone's history, because I would go down to NYU and take classes at night and then go back up to my cube on 51st and Lex and sort of, churn through some models. So I did that for first couple of years. And then I worked as an engineer at a few startups. Chris Dixon's stacking company Hunch was the first one that I joined. And then I still had the grad school itch because I never finished my PhD. So I went to law school. Midway through law school, I reconnected with Josh Kushner from Thrive. I actually joined Thrive originally as Thrive CTO, which I don't think actually Thrive has a CTO today. Maybe they do. And I was at Thrive for almost 5 years. About 3.5 years in, I met Patrick. We were introduced by a mutual friend at Sequoia, who said, "You guys are two of the nerdiest people I know, and I think you'll get along really well." And it turns out we did. As friends do, I slowly twisted his arm into letting Thrive invest in Stripe. So we actually led the $3.5 billion round all the way back in, I guess it would have been 2014. And then about 9 months later, I was out at a bar in in Astor Place in New York and having a beer with a friend. And I got a text from Patrick saying, "Hey, do you want to come be Stripe CFO?" And I think my immediate response was like, "That seems like a very bad idea." But no, credit to Patrick, he doesn't have a lot of bad ideas. I sort of investigated it and talked to some public company CFOs, and it seemed like something that I, was interested in and could do. So about 3 months later, I left Thrive and went to Stripe. I had sort of an interesting amalgamation of skills. I was, had some engineering background. I was a math major undergrad. I was at that point a member of the New York Bar, although I would never trust myself with any legal advice, and just generally kind of a quantitative, rigorous thinker. And so, started at Stripe and had to sort of learn the CFO thing from scratch. And then a few years into that, I approached Patrick and said, "Hey, I love this CFO thing, and I especially love this Stripe thing, but I'm not sure I want to be a CFO for my whole career." And that sort of led to the CPO change, which was supposed to be a little bit faster than it was, but we really took our time hiring a CFO. We hired a pretty amazing one in Divya Sarai Devara from GM. And I will say that it was also maybe a less strange transition than it seemed, because when you're working as a CFO at a global fintech company, you're doing a lot of things that are very producty. And you're sort of, thinking, you're very deep in the product and thinking about money movement and treasury. And I remember, in one of my early meetings with I think it was with Ruth Porat, I don't recall exactly, but when I was sort of learning the trade, I asked like, "Hey, what do you think will be the hardest thing to do at Stripe as CFO?" And I think it was Ruth, and she said, "It's going to be really hard to keep track of where your money is." And the level of naivete I had was, I was like, didn't understand it. I was like, what is she on? Like, I know where it's going to be. It's going to be in the bank. Like, we're not going to keep it, like underneath my mattress or something like that. And at that point, we didn't even have a treasury function. And so, building out that treasury function, seeing how closely tied it was to the quality of our products, how quickly we can settle to users is perpetually one of our top user asks. And so there's just so much overlap between product and finance at Stripe that sort of, underwrote the transition between the two. And yeah, that's kind of the crux of it.
Got it. Yeah, no, it's been amazing to watch from afar here. Another question that folks really seem to all kind of align around, and I found it curious as to kind of why. But the question is, what is Stripe when it grows up? What is the shape of this company many years from now? And I think it comes from like, there's just this, maybe it's the scale that it's operating at, the growth that we're seeing at this scale, the dominance in e-commerce, and we're all sort of basked in e-commerce. So it's sort of that, it makes a deeper impression. And maybe it's that just payments themselves are so complicated, but there's just this air of mystery, right, about the company. but really around this idea of like what it becomes. Like, is this the larva stage of something, that will become a butterfly many years from now? I'm curious, how do you think about that? What do you, how would you answer that?
So our like core operating principle is put users first. And so putting users first means a couple of things. One, it means that, even though I think we are really, really good at brand marketing and sort of dress our products up nicely and really focus on product quality, we don't actually have to be the most creative bunch at Stripe, because you just run into impediment after impediment as you're trying to grow and scale the company, particularly as it relates to global money movement and finance global expansion. And so in the principal component analysis of what Stripe becomes like over the next 10 years, like dimension number one is like what users want. And we started from this core of payments and what we found is that's evolved into global money movement, which led to this sort of notion of the global payments and treasury network we're building, which is broadly sort of money movement and money storage in the cloud. And that's sort of the core of what we do. So that is accepting payments globally, that is making payouts globally, that is sort of the complexities of multi-party payments via our Connect product and so on. And as we've been sort of building that up, we've sort of followed users into other domains. And so, we found, again, early on, we were just doing sort of pay-ins. And then we heard from users like Shopify or Squarespace, like, hey, we actually want to offer our own payment solutions. And so that, led to us, creating what we call Connect. And that was saying you can hit our API initially via OAuth. Now you hit it via sort of direct APIs. And you could offer a payment solution to your users. At a similar time, Lyft was, we were working with them and we were finding that they had a very manual solution to payouts for their drivers, and they were growing like crazy. And, they were saying, hey, like, could you help us with like programmatic payouts to drivers? And so we created an API for that. When you kind of squinted at it and you saw these two multi-party payment solutions, that became Stripe Connect, which, is sort of money movement for platforms and marketplaces. And so that became sort of the second phase of what we do, and a huge part of our business is Stripe Connect. Then as we work with Stripe Connect users, we started to see that a lot of them wanted to embed finance in what they're doing and saying, hey, can we actually allow our on-demand payment platform to fund cards to buy groceries at a store, or to pick up meals at a store. And so that led to Stripe issuing, which was sort of like, okay, we can issue cards, you can fund them just in time, you can sort of geo fence them, or like, fence them into particular MCC codes so you can only spend the money on a certain thing. And that sort of led to this sort of platform for fintech. There was then this, idea, well, what if we embedded financial services even more? And so you have Shopify Balance that's come out recently that sort of led to Stripe Treasury, which is an API to issue bank accounts directly to our users. So this is sort of like how the product has sort of snowballed as we've gone. And I'll tell you sort of where I think it's asymptoting to in the near term. There's sort of the core payment stuff. And I think that includes sort of the multi-party payments, and that's a giant business for us at this point. We have many, many billions in revenue. There's this what we call fintech as a service or banking as a service, which interestingly is not in any way meant to displace banks. Like, we want it to be a positive sum relationship with banks. But this is Stripe Capital, Stripe Issuing, Stripe Treasury, and then we have we call revenue and financial management, and this is really product for finance leaders, for biz ops leaders, for people who want to analyze and optimize their businesses, figure out levers for growth, and so on. And so those are the three main buckets. And there's a couple sort of new dimensions. I mentioned some of the consumer stuff we're doing, and then also crypto being a new dimension as well, which I'll park for now, but can come back to if it's interesting.
Got it. Yeah, well, that was going to be my next question. I thought about it as like, is crypto a threat or opportunity for Stripe? But it sounds like really we're going to talk about opportunity. But yeah, what are the plans? What are you guys working on?
So I mean, it'll sound very boring, but maybe for any of your crypto portfolio companies, it'll sound less boring. The first thing is just better support for the crypto community, because crypto companies have to deal with fiat money. Not all of them do, but a lot of them do. And it is just a nightmare of an experience today because it's seen as so high risk. It's sort of anathema to so many financial institutions. The authorization rates are so much lower for like card payments going into crypto users. And so the first thing we want to do is just take Stripe's existing product suite, fiat to fiat for the crypto world, for NFT platforms, for crypto exchanges, for anyone else doing things with crypto. So we're investing a ton in that, trying to create a self-serve experience there. So you don't have to go through endless due diligence questionnaires and things like that. And we're trying to work with some of our, our banking partners to make that just a wonderful experience. And if you think about Stripe all the way back in like 2010, 2011, the core innovation was actually just doing that for internet companies, period. And so if Web3 is sort of a new dimension of the internet, well, we want to do that again. And so we want to just help them move money in fiat land in the way they want to fund their crypto businesses. The second dimension is sort of strongly enhancing what we call the global payments and treasury network with crypto rails. And so, if you want to do payouts today, so you can fund your balance in Stripe, and then you can sling money to many countries around the world. Get to about 80 countries on Stripe today. Imminently will be to about 150. But for us to do that, it is very, very taxing for Stripe, and it's very expensive generally. And when you look at sort of getting to 200 plus countries and just sort of like covering the entire globe, or 200 plus countries and territories, it's really almost impossible without crypto. And now with these sort of globally applicable money movement schemes, be they Ethereum or L2s on Ethereum or Bitcoin Lightning, you are starting to see rails that you could actually use to move money affordably, and even very small amounts of money affordably all over the world. And so we sort of see this broadly as enhancing Stripe's money movement capabilities. And the third one is just like Web3 native things, because if you think about what Stripe has always tried to do really, really well, it is create great APIs for money movement and just broadly try to enhance the developer experience of global money movement. And with all due respect to all the crypto platforms out there today, like the developer experience for Web3 is pretty rough, and it takes a long time to ramp on it. And there are some companies doing great things in the space. Alchemy is doing some great things in the space. Actually, Coinbase is starting to do some great things in the space, but we think we actually have a lot to add there. And so there's a lot of sort of core Web3 things that we think we can build to sort of enhance the developer experience there, help people get ramped on Web3 a lot more quickly.
Yeah, it certainly seems that the first aspect you mentioned, we just made an investment in a company called Moonpay, that really, relative to the last era of, 3 years ago, when we were all talking about crypto, sort of ubiquitous, it's that, we can take a credit card payment and then, bring that in, be an onboard, into crypto without me perceiving that I'm buying Solana tokens, for instance, right? I don't need to know that. I just bought I bought a product or paid someone some money. And that is like, it sounds like that sort of a core priority is sort of, doing that, being able to facilitate that for your customers as well. But like, wow, what a difference, right? If it's a Uber, Uber on the blockchain, me not needing to come to it with Solana tokens, that's a big deal.
Yep. And I think broadly the approach we'll take here is the same one we always take, which is just sort of like talking to a zillion users, figuring out what's broken, and just trying to fix it. And it's such early days in crypto, and I think it certainly feels very frothy today, but I think it is really early days, and so I'm sure we're going to stumble over a lot of problems to solve for users.
And where are you guys in terms of like, does this seeing understanding which networks, which kind of layer one networks and protocols are kind of most useful to Stripe, which stable coins are areas of a particular interest? Are you starting to form some opinions there?
Yeah, we've sort of generally anchored to what users want, and sort of where ecosystems are developing the fastest. What we found is that, interestingly, as we look at, say the creator economy and wanting to allow global content platforms to move money around the world, so to be able to reward people for writing blog posts or that are heavily trafficked or other things like that. We asked those actually creators like what they want the most, and perhaps unsurprisingly, they just want USD. And then as a close second, it actually depends on the economy, because in some places they want local currency, but let's say they have an economy they don't really trust, they want actual USD. Behind that, they actually want USDC, and then as a very close sort of third or fourth, depending if you separate out the first two, they're actually very interested in crypto as sort of a long-term investment, and they're sort of happy to be paid in Bitcoin or Ethereum or whatever. So it's sort of interesting that we're sort of with stable coins, we're finding people are very interested in them because they don't move against other currencies very quickly, but honestly the value of them over being paid in Ether is like not that large in our UXR at this point. So far, I think the ecosystem with Ethereum is like pretty hard to beat. And so some of the early things we're doing is with them, but we're hugely impressed by what's happening with Solana as well. And just recently had my team at Solana Conf, and just the vibrancy there is clearly growing. And it's actually some of the math they've done around sort of like Tower Byzantine fault tolerance, and just the actual sort of cryptographic innovation is pretty amazing, and I buy it. So far, I think we're probably anchoring to clearly Bitcoin, Ethereum, and Solana. And then, with Ethereum, you have to think about all the L2s. And, I think some people are very interested in just L1 Ethereum, even though they're happy to pay the costs. But, for other people, they're really sensitive to the gas fees. And so we have to work with, the Starkwares or the Polygons or the Optimisms. It's sort of early days, like I said, and it's a mishmash of different user preferences.
Yeah, gotcha. Yeah, no, it's agree with you very much. We were all actually over in Portugal for the Solana Developer Conference, and yeah, the energy behind that protocol is pretty incredible. But in general, right, this whole ecosystem is just growing at such a rate. But moving on a little bit, curious from a geographic perspective, what areas are our biggest priorities for Stripe for the next few years?
So right now, a very, very heavy focus on Europe. And I started to be really encouraged by the way we started to see the investor landscape start to skew more towards Europe. I saw a graphic recently that showed that I think it was only 3 years ago that the $1 billion plus exits in Europe flipped from being more likely to be bootstrapped to more likely to be VC funded. It was like, I think only 3 years ago. So sort of like amazing that just how little funding European tech got. And I think it's just booming at this point. So we've been very focused on Europe in particular, and the UK over the past couple of years. Regionally, like I feel like APAC is not even sort of cognizably a single region. We sort of think about it as Southeast Asia, AUNZ, sort of Japan doing its own thing, South Korea doing its own thing, India doing its own thing, and then China cross-border. We are investing quite heavily in APAC, in particular right now in Southeast Asia, and really increasing our investment in India. Our product's pretty mature in Japan, and so there's not that much additional investment going into it in 2022, but we think long-term it'll be a huge market for us. And then China cross-border is mostly just Chinese companies incorporating outside of China and using Stripe's core products. So it isn't sort of an investment area of its own. We're not getting South Korea yet, which is a bummer, but we'll get there before long. It's actually quite a hard market to enter. And then 2023 and beyond, I think we're going to really start investing in Latin America. It's going to be 10+% of global GDP. There's incredible developer ecosystem down there. The GDP is actually growing quite quickly. We've been in Brazil since 2013, and we still haven't launched. We just launched Boletos finally this year, which is sort of just a very important convenience store or offline. It doesn't have to be convenience stores, but offline mediated payment method. We're still missing a very important feature, which is anticipations on card payments, because card payments down there are sort of by default like parceled out to merchants. So you make $100 purchase to a merchant, and the way the card system works is that you're only receiving that over 6 months, say. And then, there's this ecosystem. How do you anticipate those 6 months for a discount? So you say like, I want all that now, but I'll take a 6% discount or something like that. And so that is the really key thing we're still missing in Brazil. And so that's coming this year, but LATAM is going to be broadly at 2023 and beyond. So I'd sort of rank them as EMEA, APAC, LATAM, and yeah, but we think one of our core principles is think global first from day one. And so, one of the core things we really want to do is, what crypto is starting to do, which is one of the reasons why we're so interested in crypto, create just unified protocols and APIs for moving money all around the world. And that's why like geographic coverage matters so much. We've launched 11 countries in the past 12 to 14 months. And we also acquired a company called Paystack in Africa, which is now live in 4 countries in Africa. And so we have a long way to go.
Yeah. No, it's a big world, right? With lots of gates between on borders here. We are speaking of Latin America. We are been very excited investors in the region for a long time, and particularly from a fintech perspective, because it's the degree to which the consumer is underserved is relative to the U.S. It's just stunning, right? And so the opportunity, it just not sure where that ends. It just keeps going and going. So curious about maybe like a product that we also have this awareness of, what Stripe Atlas, that it's this little feature. It's cool. It's like totally get why it's strategic. But I'm curious, it's been out in the wild for 5 years now. Not a lot of it, doesn't get a lot of attention. What are we all, what's happening with it? Is there, I sort of idly suspicious that it's actually, it drives a significant portion of U.S. entrepreneurship. But curious what's happening there.
Yeah, so it's a product that I think gets very high billing because it, I think, is disproportionately valuable to users outside of the U.S. And in particular to users in countries where incorporating locally is particularly challenging, or getting access to financial services is particularly challenging. It is, I think we've incorporated over 10,000 companies via Atlas, like active Stripe processing companies via Atlas. So it's, it is one that sort of very directly grows the GDP of the internet. Mm-hmm. When you roll them all together, Atlas looks like a very, very large user for Stripe, but it's not, a giant dimension of our business. I think part of the reason for that is that when you look at, the economies that currently drive, the sort of outsized returns, they tend to be ones where there's very strong VC funding, and there's a very vibrant ecosystem of corporate law firms to support that. And so incorporation and opening a bank account just isn't that challenging. We do have some interesting, plans for Atlas and how it evolves that I think will probably make it even more interesting to, the YC companies and to sort of, seed stage companies more broadly. But to date, it's really been one that, we've invested in always improving the product experience. Like one of the key investments we made recently was working very closely with with the IRS on getting tax IDs issued much faster. And so it used to be that you would go through Atlas and it would take a long time to get a tax ID issued. Now we actually have an arrangement with the IRS where we can get a whole batch of them issued and then dole them out ourselves. And so we're very focused on making an amazing experience, but it's still a pretty small team and one that indexes towards companies being formed outside the US.
Yeah, interesting. 10,000 though. It's I like, it's an interesting basket to bet on over the next 20 years. Yeah. I'm curious what, in a real hurry, Stripe's, the product roadmap has really expanded, vastly. 5 years ago, right? Like Atlas was really number two or number three, I suppose, product. Now there are sort of dozens, and many more initiatives that we probably aren't, most of us aren't really aware of yet. What, from your perspective, which of these are you most excited about?
Made me choose my favorite child.
You can do two.
Well, I'll say one that I'm particularly excited about that we launched recently is Stripe Tax. And the reason being that we've wanted to for a long time, the top user asked for a long time. It's not a perfect product yet, but it's making very, very fast progress. It's just such a huge impediment to global economic growth to figure out how to collect and remit tax in any single country, let alone the 10 to 15 countries in which you may want to operate. And so that's one that I'm particularly fond of. And I think it's one of these products where we sort of want 90+% of Stripe users to use it. We recently did a small experiment where we added it to Stripe onboarding, and we saw not far off of that, the percentage of users who activated it. So it's sort of one that I think will go a long way. So that would definitely be one. Another one we launched recently, which I'm very fond of because it's just so powerful for our users, is Stripe revenue recognition. So if you are really any business, but if you're a subscriptions-oriented business, the ASC 606 guidance and how to implement that, if you're a US-based company, is incredibly complicated. And so we actually built a full-fledged, ledger on the back end of Stripe, and now we're actually have in beta a way to sort of customize the general ledger in Stripe and tie it into your general ledger with NetSuite or Oracle or others. And one of the reasons why I'm so excited about this is because as we pushed it out there, there's products where you have to sort of push it out and then really find a way to get people to notice it and advertise in the dashboard and so on. Products where you push them out and it's just you're almost overwhelmed by demand, and that's what we've seen with RevRec, and that's when you're really solving a pain point for users. So those both sort of fall into that SaaS bucket I was referencing earlier, revenue and financial management. But yeah, those are two, indexing on recent ones, but those are two that I'm very excited about.
That second one is cool, and also from a perspective of the Stripe capital, working capital, gets you much deeper into the weeds with your customer about how much capital and in what places would be high leverage for them. Yes. But yeah, no, that's a cool one.
Amazing stat on that one. And this is a causation stat, not correlation, because we do a holdback on it. But users who receive a Stripe Capital loan grow sustainably over the ensuing 2 to 3 years at 113% faster. And so you can imagine how that compounds.
Oh, I saw that. Yeah. No, that's a cool cool stat. Yeah.
So another direct sort of grow the GDP of the internet. Instigation.
Yeah, cool. Well, let's maybe broaden the discussion. So I'm not sure if you're able to catch the earlier slides that kind of shared with the group here, but it's pretty if we take a step back and we look at the landscape of fintech, over we're in the second decade now, really of significant entrepreneurship and investment. It's pretty incredible to see that the pace of software-driven innovation in financial services and it just keeps accelerating. And one of the pockets of this that I talked about earlier was the ways in which the cracks are beginning to show in the armor of banks. The neobanks really, starting to take a very large share of kind of younger or closer to the line customers, and yet Bank of America, JP Morgan, they're 10% off all-time highs from a market cap perspective. With that context, I'm curious how you think about, and obviously we're really just speculating here, but you have such an interesting seat to think about this. 20 years from now, what do companies like those look like? What do you think has changed or not changed? If it's a JP Morgan, let's say.
So first off, it's interesting because you'll sometimes hear from the JPMs or other banks, or you'll just hear people speculating that, Stripe is here to sort of eat the bank's lunch, or that, we're their biggest competitor, which, from our end is the exact opposite of how we think about it. We actually are, we want a positive sum relationships with banks. Like we have one set of capabilities, they have a very different set of capabilities, and we actually think by pooling them, we can do a whole lot more together. And so, I think today we have partnerships with, it must be 40 or 50 banks that help sort of power what Stripe does. And, we are a very, very strong revenue source for them. There's, some, I guess, demand aggregation that we do. So we may not be their highest margin partner, but we drive a lot of business their way. And with Stripe Capital, we do work with banks on the back end to sort of, sell off the loans. And we're actually very, very eager to introduce more bank brands to Stripe. So we're very eager to say, well, here's the loans you could get from these different financial partners we have. And, we can do an integration with each of these banks such that the funding happens immediately. We do the servicing, but the actual balance sheet comes to the banks, the terms come to the banks, and so on. So at least from our end, we don't sort of, we don't have any, there's going to be no direct causation between Stripe and sort of banks suffering. We hope that's actually the other way around. I guess my short answer to your question is I suspect that over the next 20 years, the products of these banks are going to have to get better. I think you're actually seeing this already. It's in, bits and pieces, but, I broadly think banking portals have gotten better. They're not amazing. I broadly think they've gotten better. Zelle is now actually used pretty widely for real-time money movement. You see this more in Europe than the US, but FPS in Europe and sort of real-time payment systems have really come online. You have RTP in the US, I think will come along as well. And I think the neobanks and sort of, the sort of quasi neobanks, like people who are using e-money systems aren't actually banks to build financial services, will I think force more competition. More competition means better products. So I think their products will get better. And the last thing I'd say is I do think there are, I think this sort of embedded fintech, like platforms offering financial services, I think will start to take share from some of the banks, particularly for specialized industries. So if you're a platform for barbershops, or you're WAG for dog walkers, you probably can offer some financial products that are more tailored to these sort of income streams that your users have. And so around the edges, I think you're going to see some of these embedded fintechs take business away from banks. But from my seat, I broadly think they're still going to be around, which,
Yeah. No, I mean, it's so many different businesses, right? Smushed together, many of which are enhanced by the existence of benefiting just as much as the fintech guys. And then, we're, just last week, right? JP Morgan, Capital One, the competitive forces driven by the neobanks are saying, hey, Capital One taking away overdraft fees on their checking products, JP Morgan sort of halfway capitulating doing that, and then also halfway sort of saying, hey, we'll make this early wage access kind of feature. All of that stems really from not other banks, but from these kind of fintech players, and their influence. And so I'm with you.
And you have trillions of dollars of market cap on the board, right? So this is financial services, and it's still growing at a 10% CAGR, right? And so there's plenty of room for a lot of winners here. And I'm sure that there will be certain banks that sort of are strongly weakened and don't execute well, just like there are companies in every space that don't. But broadly, I think some of the big guys are actually just going to get better.
Yeah, for sure. What kinds of investing are you doing these days? Or have you put it aside entirely, or is it all through Stripe? What are you doing these days?
Oh, for me personally?
Yeah.
Not that much, but I've always liked to invest in things that I understand. So I invested in a company recently called Medallion, and I invested in it because when we were founding Oscar, the health insurance company at Thrive, we got to sort of really dig into health provider networks, and just what a fantastic business provider networks are. And I guess I'd never pre-Oscar realized that these should exist, but it's not, insurance companies don't sort of go hand pick every doctor. They work with networks, and these networks actually play a pretty key role in the broader healthcare system today. And Medallion is building, Derek Lowe, the CEO, is building a really amazing sort of software platform for provider networks, and I think he's got just tremendous opportunities to maybe even play a bigger role in the provider network landscape. And so I try to find companies like that are sufficiently far away from Stripe's corporate investing that there aren't conflicts, but that I deeply understand. So that's one. And then at Stripe, we do actually invest quite actively. We tend to invest in companies that are doing things that we think we can sort of really support from a growth standpoint, or that can augment Stripe's relationship with users. And so these tend to be reasonably close to our product suite, but far enough away that we're not going to build them. So one that we announced a while back is investing in Check, which is a payroll infrastructure company. A lot of the platforms we work with are very interested in offering payroll. It's not something we're going to get to anytime soon. And so we've been very excited about the prospect of helping Check work with the platforms at Stripe and actually creating sort of like a 1 + 1 = 3 type of product experience. And that sort of underwrote the investment.
Yeah, no, love the company. Know them well. It occurs to me the question there is, how do you guys think about building a product versus investing in a company that like Check that's creating a new this kind of embedded payroll notion versus acquiring a company wholesale and incorporating that in the platform? How do you draw distinctions there? Oh, this is something we should invest in, or no, wow, we really need to, we should just own this.
Yeah. So in our corp dev journey, from the standpoint of acquisitions, we broadly found that there are sort of two models of acquisition that make sense to us, and others may find different models that work, but they actually are the poles. So on the one hand, acquire and run as a subsidiary. So we do this broadly with Paystack. And so Paystack in Africa, we fund. They have a budget. They have a sort of a board internally. And Shola, the CEO, is one of the most phenomenal entrepreneurs I've ever met, and he runs that company, and it's growing just phenomenally. And we try to stay out of their way and help, however we can. And then the other pole is just integrate as fast as possible. We acquired a company, Reco, recently, which we announced, an Indian company that's building payments reconciliation and has built this pretty amazing ledger that we want to use as our back end for some of our revenue and financial management products. And we want to be in market Q3, Q4 with a Stripe powered product. We have sort of in the past dabbled in this midsection of, well, we're going to integrate some, but it's going to take us 3 years to really integrate. And it gets really painful, sort of having, your people functions, your GTM functions, other things like that sort of broadly separated. So the reason I give all that context is that when it's something pretty core to Stripe, it's a high bar to acquire it, because that integration process, that trying to integrate fast, is really expensive. And, these sort of like acceleration case that you make for we're going to go faster because of, owning this thing is, I think, significantly enervated by just how hard it is to integrate. So therefore, we tend to acquire things that have amazing founders, are slightly away from our core, and that, we feel like have really strong tech stacks. So there isn't a whole lot of replatforming we have to do. We started to move, or we've now substantially moved towards a sort of gRPC mediated Java SOA. And so now, as long as we can sort of wrap services that already exist from third parties, we don't need to sort of retire code. You get a lot of the security and reliability benefits directly from Stripe, or from our core infrastructure. So that's sort of M&A, tends to be amazing founders, a little bit away from the core, has to be a good tech stack. In terms of investing, like I said, it's something that we deeply understand, and we think we can really enhance and help, and typically something that we is going to use a lot of our products, so that we can learn from the user. We find that a lot of times the companies we learn the most from are companies we've invested in, and then partner with. I guess it's the things that we think there's a good positive sum relationship to be had, that sometimes we'll invest and do that, but maybe we want to stay very neutral in an area because there's so many players in it, and we don't want to sort of alienate some of them. Gotcha.
Let's see. I might try to do a couple more and then try to grab some questions from the audience. But if you were to go start a company now, what would it be? What space would it be in? And I'd love to answer from a fintech perspective, but if you've got something else, then go for it.
It's a good question. I will say that I still think, and I think there's been several companies who've been chipping away at this, but I still think that no one has really cracked the modern ERP, and just you have sort of two types of data, as far as I can tell. You have what I would sort of label data science data, which is sort of online, roughly real time. Constituents at a company have broad-based access to it, and it's very low integrity, so you can't close your books on it. And then you have what I would call sort of financial data, and this is high integrity, but exists in a walled garden, is sort of pretty manual and slow, and it takes you several days or even several weeks to close the books. And when you look at a lot of the tools that finance teams are using today, they're really rough, and I think it's partly that walled garden sort of user experience, where you don't see a lot of technologists actually using the tools that finance teams use. I think, as a former CFO, I can say I was pretty appalled by sort of, what was available to our finance team to help with their, as an enterprise finance team, to help us process financial data and do it with the right level of controls and so on. So I think someone's going to bring these two together. I think you're going to have sort of more real time, carefully controlled, and very high integrity, and beautiful to use sort of financial data suite. And I'd love for someone to build that. So that's definitely a big one. I'd say one other is, I think there's probably something at the intersection of the creator economy and Web3, and I'm not precisely sure what it is yet. I was talking to a PM at Stripe a while back who had an idea to sort of mint coins for creators, so that you could sort of support creators, but also you could almost bet on artists over time and create an efficient market for art, the artistic and creative community. That struck me as an interesting idea, but more broadly, with the creator economy just booming, and with Web3 booming, I'm very interested in ideas that sort of fall at the intersection of those two.
Yeah, interesting. Well, that was great putting you on the spot, Liz. If you're ever interested, I think we could find some capital to help you build a team there. So let me jump into maybe some questions from the audience. So let's see. Biggest learning jumping into the CFO role, and how did those learnings influence kind of where you sit today as a CPO?
Well, some of these are specific to Stripe. I'd say like one that's pretty generic is it took me a while to realize just how powerful having the right head of corporate FP&A, or as we call it at Stripe, corporate finance and strategy, could be. I think companies are very reticent to push themselves towards calculating ROI. It sort of seems like everything's important, and ROI is so hard to calculate because you're growing so fast. And I wish we had earlier just like forced ourselves to put a stake in the ground for everything we were doing with from the standpoint of what is the ROI next year, 3 years out, 5 years out, and honestly 10 years out of this area. And so I think a corporate team that can work with a product, financial, and strategy team to sort of roll that all up and just try to create this apples to apples comparison, I think is something that we've done over the past few years. It has really, really proved useful. A second thing is, and again, these are opinions, but avoid internal transfer pricing. Like, internal transfer pricing is incredibly confusing. The only type of internal transfer pricing I'd recommend is when one of your teams is using another team's product. So, we have, the risk team using the bank connections team to authenticate bank accounts. Okay, sure. The risk team can charge the connections team, the connections team can charge the risk team for that, and that can be sort of part of their their sort of internal revenue, if you want. But anything where you're saying, listen, 20% of this goes to you, 80% goes to me, it just gets wildly confusing, and your ROI numbers, there's can be no integrity to them, because if you change it to 60-40, your entire business sort of flips on its head, and you should change your resource allocation entirely. So that's the second one. And then the third one, which, as I mentioned earlier, was a key learning related to Stripe, is just how important it was, and particularly for any fintech company, to build a very, very strong treasury function. So the first senior hire I met as CFO was I hired a VP from Goldman to come in as our treasurer. He's now not only our treasurer, but also our head of risk. And he's just done a phenomenal job for the company. And just, I didn't understand it when Ruth said it, but being able to track your cash and know where the hell it is, when COVID hit at the beginning of 2020, like, fortunately, we were very well capitalized, but you start seeing, bank accounts dry up in various places, and then you're worried about like, oh, geez, I got to go fund that one because we're not seeing as much come in there. And just that treasury function was so key. So those were some of the key learnings. Gotcha.
Let's try another one. Given Stripe's overarching mission, increasing GDP of the internet, how do you as CPO balance the tension between flexibility and focus?
Well, maybe it's useful to just broadly describe our prioritization system. We basically have, and we've worked towards this for a long time, we basically have 2 top 6 lists. One is infrastructure horizontals, and there's always a top 6 for those. Security and reliability are always number 1, number 2. But another one might be, we were trying to comply with some India data locality regulations. There was a pretty harsh deadline for those, and so those hit so many teams at Stripe that we had to put that number 3 on the list, like India data localization. And then we have a top 6 of like product investments, and those sort of are typically sort of, well, they can be quantitative or qualitative. And so one of those for next year is about crypto and what we want to do in crypto. Another one is about growing our SaaS products. It's a major priority for us, and those really help to align the product and GTM functions. And so we try to sort of set those twice a year. So we're actually in the process of finalizing those for 2022 right now, and we revisit them each half. And so the flexibility sort of comes in, structurally or systematically every 6 months. And then we leave a little slack in the system. We try to maintain some slack in our budget because there's going to be stuff that comes up. And so we've invested a lot. Stripe is a company that serves companies of every size. The smallest of small startups up to the Amazons of the world. Of not every country or every geo, but a lot of countries and geos, a lot of business models and so on. So we have a priority user ask system, the PUA system, that we've had to really, really focus on, because you're going to get all these user asks in from the sales side, from the account management side. And so we have a way of routing them and then making decisions on them. And that's sort of another mechanism for balancing planfulness with flexibility. And then I would say the last one, maybe, and we're only getting better at this now, is really building the systems infrastructure to be able to create localized decision making. Because for everything that gets up to the exec team for a decision, there's 10 decisions that you hope teams are making without ever knowing about them. And so you want teams to be able to sort of broadly own their own destinies. And they're going to have better broad product ideas and than in particular about their areas, but also just in general than I am. And so I'd love for them to be able to sort of make those decisions locally. And that means, the right systems to create, interfaces between teams, services that own their data, code paths that can be understood, as opposed to where we used to be in a giant Ruby monolith. And so that actually creates a lot of localized flexibility for teams too.
Yeah, gotcha. Somebody very smart said you hire great people and then leave them alone, or
exactly
something along those lines. Well, Will, we're running a little over. I wanted to just say thank you so much for taking the time, and also I should mention we are small investors in Stripe that I think predates you're joining the company, but so also very grateful for all the value creation that you and the team have contributed to there as well.
No, my pleasure. And I know there's some other questions in here for anybody who wants to hit me up.
There are millions. Yeah. Have at it.
You can get me at WG@Stripe. I will try to answer anything on your mind. I'll say just on the IPO one, we're very happy as a private company, so no plans for now. So that's probably not one to waste time on, but of the others, super happy to answer them.
Awesome. Well, then we will try to record them then, and I think we've also got this session recorded as well, and but we'll connect a bunch of dots.
Awesome. Well, thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks so much, Will.
All right, see you later.